Let me say this right out of the gate. I liked Joe Rogan. My first exposure to him was on News Radio, perhaps the most underrated sitcom of all time.
Incapacitate?
Yeah, sends 400 volts through the system at 4 amps. Instant temporary paralysis. I call it the stalker shocker.
Yes, I can see you've written it here in magic marker.
In it, he played Joe Grelly, a street-smart electrician because, 90s sitcoms. He was a lovable bro, something that would characterize Rogan to this very day. Now, shortly thereafter, he hosted the greatest TV show a teenager in the 90s could ever ask for, Fear Factor. There was nothing better than getting home from school with your friends and watching desperate celebrity hopefuls eat elephant testicles for our amusement. Then he began the UFC phase. Now, I'm not a UFC fan, mostly because I don't stand for any blood sport that doesn't include trampolines. Still, as one of the key architects of the genre and champion of its merits, Joe Rogan was part of something that brought a small franchise to a worldwide phenomenon. And while some people might look at the UFC as the broiest bro that's ever broed, it's still one of the few sports that gets comparable numbers for female fighting matches, not to mention hosted the first major sports event in history to have 2 openly gay opponents. And I haven't even mentioned his podcast. As one of the early adopters of the platform, Joe Rogan has gone on to become an institution. He claims to get nearly 30 million downloads per month and has a never-ending spectrum of high-profile stars on his show. Despite being prone to conspiracy theories, Joe built a reputation by having a huge range of guest stars from across the spectrum on his show. But in the last couple of years, a pattern started emerging. Joe Rogan started giving rise to the daddies. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves, we should explain the phenomenon of the alternative influence network.
What does it mean, Professor?
Actually, I'm just an assistant professor.
But what does it mean, assistant professor?
I don't know.
In her new Data and Society report, Rebecca Lewis examined how 65 political influencers cross-pollinate information to create a network that exposes kids to incrementally more extreme political positions. You see, YouTube is one of the primary news sources for the younger generation. The all-holy algorithms that dictate what videos are suggested next on the platform are based on a lot of factors which YouTube itself doesn't publicly disclose. Quote, influence is not created in a vacuum. It occurs within and propagates through social networks. One of the most effective ways to network on YouTube is by referencing and including other people in video content. So, Joe Rogan has Dave Rubin on his show. Fans of Dave Rubin now start following Joe and vice versa. Then, Dave Rubin has Stefan Molyneux on his show and the same effect occurs. Then, Stefan Molyneux does a video defending Richard Spencer, and you can see how far down the rabbit hole you've sunk. The thing is, you don't always need to play 6 degrees of Goebbels. You can simply watch Dave Rubin interview Stefan Molyneux.
I mean, if we took the brain of a 25-year-old black man and the brain of a 25-year-old white man, what is it that they're doing that...
Different sizes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or better yet, Joe Rogan interviews Stefan Molyneux.
The kind of men who float through the single mom world, they're not always the best kind of men, right? They're kind of trashy, right? Because like the really competent and successful and intelligent men aren't trolling the girlfriend farms at the single mom, low rent housing ghettos, right?
Right.
Joe Rogan is known for his ability to simply have a conversation with a guest and make it interesting. Most high-profile interviews appear on his show for 2.5 hours. That's a very long time to speak to another human being with very few breaks in between. There's no criticism to be made there. That's a talent that Joe Rogan exudes with very few equals. However, in these interviews, Joe isn't known for provoking his guests. They're just there to have a casual conversation and not have their views questioned.
It's important to make that distinction as a Western chauvinist, that I think the West is the best. I don't care what race you are. But I don't think that other cultures are different. I think they're worse. And Islam is 500 years behind us. We were shitty. We had witch hunts.
Inquisition.
We had the Inquisition. They're not caught up to us yet. They're not as advanced. And I think 2 big problems with them as far as progress goes is the Quran is an exceptionally violent book. It doesn't have a 2.0 the way Christians do. And no one ever talks about this, but they have a major problem with inbreeding. They are marrying their first cousins again and again and again, and that makes your evolution go backwards.
This can be adorable in the case of Elon Musk, where he talked about AI like a Terminator movie and ended up smoking a joint live on the show. He was never asked about how the majority of tech designers working on AI are overwhelmingly white, let alone be questioned about Tesla's labor practices or his announcement to rank media's credibility via a website. Because they're just two buddies smoking a joint and having a rap. That's one of the key reasons he keeps getting high-profile guests, many of whom might not even be doing press junkets at the time. The majority of his guests are often athletes or comedians, but ever since joining the ranks of the intellectual dark web, he's been regularly featuring a steady rotation of its most prominent members. Rogan is the host of his own show and thus is completely entitled to book the guests of his choosing, and by no means is he obligated to host prominent leftists or academics. But by consistently booking guests on the far-right spectrum, it is more than a tacit approval that Rogan himself rests firmly within their camp and has no interest in the counter-arguments.
And the issue with men, I think with young men, and this is one of the things I've been trying to address, is that if your fundamental presupposition is that our culture is a patriarchal tyranny, which is an appalling presupposition, along with the idea that the best way of looking at history is that it was the oppression, the continual oppression of women by men, which is also something that I regard as an absolutely reprehensible doctrine. Then, okay, so it's a patriarchal tyranny.
But that, in their defense, that did exist. There has been continual oppression of women. It's just not the only thing that's happened. Kind of have a point in the fact that if you're looking at all the events that have ever taken place, there's a significant number of them that have been women being oppressed.
But I don't know if there's more women who've been oppressed than men who've been oppressed.
That's a very good point.
Now, looking back at the Alternative Influence Network, it's immediately evident that Joe Rogan is a smaller cog resting on the outskirts of the network. Yet, with the world's most famous podcast and the largest fan base, he is undoubtedly the biggest entry point. He may be your first daddy, but he shall not be your last. If that term seems confusing, perhaps we should explain something else. What unites most members of the Alternative Influence Network is a hatred of third-wave feminism and support of the men's rights movement. The term taking the red pill often refers to waking up to the way the world actually works, rather than believing the SJW propaganda the mainstream media feeds you. Whether that be disagreeing with the concept of a patriarchal hierarchy in society, all the way over to George Soros funding a globalist white genocide. It's an odd term to be adopted by the alt-right, considering it was coined by two trans women. So like Jordan Peterson, one of his most frequent guests of the past couple of years, Joe Rogan acts like a father figure for disenfranchised youth, pushing other daddies on listeners by cross-pollinating with other key members of the network, until the day comes when your partly rational conspiracy theory daddy turns into your drunk racist Thanksgiving daddy.
All I've been hearing about Africa lately is what's going on with white farmers in South Africa, which is it's very scary stuff, where people are encouraging people to attack white farmers.
Now, we're not saying the left doesn't have this problem as well.
I'm a house.
One of the reasons we left out the Man Show from Joe's list of accomplishments is that it's the television equivalent of eating an issue of Playboy that's been soaked in beer overnight. But the worst machination of that series happened to be hosted by the new progressive hero that is Jimmy Kimmel. So there's blood to be found on both sides.
Maybe it would be easier if you put your mouth on it.
What we are saying is that people should be aware of their potential indoctrination into concepts of misogyny that may go far beyond their initial beliefs when they're allowing YouTube's algorithms to suggest what they watch next. Or when they see one of their trusted celebrities inviting his new super friends to the party. Hey, thanks so much for watching, guys. If you want more of our stuff, you can click down here, hit the like button. You can click down here, hit the subscribe button, and continue watching. Thanks.
And you can leave hate comments too. I mean, the internet loves hate comments.
Please don't do that.
Start a flame war. Who knows? The power is yours. Welcome to the internet.
Oh, God help us all.